All right, so for chapter 12, we now look at cognitive development during middle childhood. And with cognitive development, we start with Piaget. Now, Piaget proposed that in the first 2 years, a child relies mostly on their motor skills and their senses in order for them to construct their cognitive ability or intellect. And during the early childhood years, we looked at them improving in that ability through the use of their senses, but they were in what he called pre-operational stage, meaning that they were limited by certain limitations that he said that prevented them from thinking logically. So they focused on appearance and they were very egocentric in their thought processes, and they couldn't really understand the irreversibility of things. Now he takes us into the middle childhood years, and he believes that now we are in the stage of concrete operational thought. And according to Piaget, this is the term for their ability to finally reason in a logical way. So they can actually be taught or explained to why is it that two items that contain the same amount of water would still contain the same amount of water regardless of whether we emptied one in a longer glass, for example. Or why is it that it is the exact same amount of the Play-Doh, and it will continue to be the same amount of Play-Doh even though we flattened one of the balls. So this concept of logical thinking is attained at this level, according to Piaget, and it is something that happens gradually, not overnight. So children develop a higher level of cognition as they progress into the concrete operational stage. Um, for Piaget, he always looked at a particular experiment or perspective in order to communicate the level of development. And during middle childhood, he proposed a series of experiments that looked at what he called classification, the concept of classification. Now, classification is a logical operation. If you were to give a preschooler a bunch of crayons and tell him to separate them by color or group them by color, he can pretty much group the yellow crayons and the red crayons and the blue crayons in three separate categories. Now, a different type of classification is what Piaget called hierarchy of classification, and that means that when you have a category, let's say food, you know that food employs or includes multiple subcategories, and these subcategories have yet more categories under them. So an example of food, for example, we have meat, we have fruits, and then under meat, we know that meat comes in different types. We have pork or beef or chicken, and then under pork, you can subcategorize that into, for example, bacon. Now, the movement in a hierarchy of classification up and down is a cognitive concept that requires the person to understand that as you go from the bottom up, everything on the hierarchy up is included. So bacon will always be pork, bacon will always be meat, and will always be food. So I can say that bacon is a food, and I could also say that bacon is a meat. But I can't do it the other way around from the top down. I can't say that food will always be bacon, because the top of a hierarchy is always inclusive of more categories than it does at the bottom. So this concept that is very easily attainable for an adult is not for a child during middle childhood, and is something that a child achieves as they progress during middle childhood, because it is it's a skill, it's a cognitive skill that they need to experiment with in order to understand. But they can logically get it. It is a task that can be attained. One of the experiments that he devised was to show children a picture of 9 flowers and asked the question, are there more daisies or flowers? And what he found is that the majority of children younger than 8, under 8, were usually answering that there were more daisies than flowers. And the reason is that in their mind, again, they were focused on appearance is one, but they also did not yet understand the concept of classification and hierarchy of classification. And that is, flowers is a hierarchy. It's the top of the group, let's say. And under flowers, you can include, of course, roses and daisies. And therefore, the correct answer is that there are more flowers than daisies. Now, this, according to Piaget, is something that most children under 7 were not able to recognize. But after 8, which is still within the childhood, the middle childhood period, they were able to actually understand that concept easily. Now, when you look at elementary school and you think of what is being taught in terms of mathematical concepts, you will see how that it also progresses or kind of correlates with their cognitive ability. So in a preschooler is working on their numbers, one-to-one correspondence, understanding that maybe 2 means 2 items and that 3 means 3 items. So these are the basic mathematical concepts that we're working on in early childhood. But when we get into middle childhood and the elementary school years, you're actually moving into a different type of mathematical, logical concepts. And you will see that we ask children, for example, to talk about addition and subtraction, and we want them to understand that, no matter how you arrange the numbers in addition, if you say 12 plus 3 or 3 plus 12, the amount will always be 15, and that is a conservation concept that was not attained earlier in the earlier years. Concept like seriation is very important also, because without seriation, which is that things can be arranged in a logical series, again, this is a concept that they begin to understand in middle childhood. Previously, they might have recited their alphabet, or they counted by from 1 to 10 in the early childhood years. But if you've ever listened to a child recite their alphabet or count, you have probably seen them skip a couple of numbers or skip a letter or so without really understanding the concept of seriation, and that you cannot skip numbers. You have to go in order. So this logical concept of seriation is not attained until middle childhood. And that is the reason why the number line becomes something that they can actually comprehend and understand. Similarly, classification, as we mentioned, is also a concept that they can understand, and it's used in mathematical achievement. When we ask them, for example, to group by or count by 20s or count by 10s, and understand that 20s include 20 and 21 and 23 and 25 and all of those numbers. So those concepts are easier to comprehend in middle childhood because of that cognitive ability that they have achieved, according to Piaget. Now, unlike Piaget, Vygotsky, who actually shared Piaget's thoughts about educators really considering children's thought process and not just the product, he did not agree with Piaget about how do children achieve that product. He believed that the thought process is not something that the child can achieve by themselves. This is what Piaget proposed. He said that the child will arrive at it at a certain time because cognitively they're not there, and when they are there, they're going to produce the answer. But Vygotsky believed or stressed the role of instruction. And he really did emphasize that if we have a mentor or a teacher who provides a scaffold or a support to help the child kind of bridge the gap between potential, their ability to achieve something, and the knowledge that they can achieve through their ZPD or their zone of proximal development. Then those tasks become easier to comprehend and achieve. And the integral tool here is always going to be language. So he really believed that a good mentor with a good a plan that is within the ZPD of a child, and utilizing social mediation, utilizing language, can effectively help the child achieve that cognitive milestone much faster than if the child was left alone.